the middle of last year, I got the bug. And the bug hit me indirectly. It hit me when I saw the intersection between law and crypto. And I realized that those are two things that are better together. That you can unleash the power of crypto when it's backed by law, and that law can be more effective when it's backed by this new blockchain and crypto technology. And I saw that these could come together in a way that was where one was not holding back the other, but they were mutually supporting each other. And so things evolved, and I noticed, about the same time as everyone else on the planet noticed, that securities law, especially US securities law, sort of dominates the ICO crypto blockchain landscape. And I'll go into some details, but it's kind of interesting. There's a case that I'll talk about from 1946. Okay, even I wasn't born in 1946. Okay, but there's a US Supreme Court from 1946 called Howey, that I'm sure everyone's heard of by now, that is the global topic of conversation when it comes to ICOs and crypto. And it's so strange. I mean, it's 9 guys, and they really were 9 guys, sitting in 1946, right after World War II, who decided this case, and here we are in Kyiv in 2018 talking about it and how it relates to crypto and blockchain. This is not a treaty, this is not a law, this is a court case. And I'll go into the details of it and explain the context, but it's just amazing to me. And I'm seeing that there's a vast need for global law when it comes to securities, crypto, and blockchain. And if you left it up to governments, they would never get around to it because there's always an incentive for someone to stay back and not participate. Everyone's always advancing their own interest. But there's a really interesting, fascinating thing happening, which is the expansion of the crypto economy is putting the heat on national governments to harmonize their law. And for the first time ever, we're seeing sort of a global securities capital law forming, not because the leaders of our countries are so clever and so motivated, but because they have to. So, God bless Satoshi. That without Bitcoin, this wouldn't have happened for another 100 years. But now there's no escaping it because if governments want to tax, regulate, do all the things that, unfortunately, for better or for worse, they need to do for us to have civilization, they have to reach an accord on how to handle all this. So, I'll start up. The title of the talk is SAFTs, using them the right way. I'm going to go broader than that. But just to make the acronym clear, SAFT stands for Simple Agreement for Future Tokens. Simple Agreement for Future Tokens. It's a form of agreement that you use that if you're raising money in an ICO to build a platform, but the platform isn't built yet, by using this agreement correctly, you can stay on the right side of securities law, and as the gentleman back mentioned, make money and not go to jail, which is generally better than making money and going to jail or not having money, which sucks also. There's a couple of terms I throw around in here. The 2 foundational laws in the United States that govern securities are the Securities Act of 1933, which when you think about it was a long time ago, and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. The Exchange Act is the law that created the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC. Sometimes I hear people saying SEC. Don't say SEC, SEC. That's how it's referred to. And some people, when they hear SEC in the background, they hear because it has a little, can be scary for some people. All right, so let's just, I'll go into more detail, but I just want to give those terms out. Oh, here's a little reminder. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer yet. Everyone got that? Okay, cool. So I've given this presentation all over the world. And every time I give it, it evolves because there's more law coming out. And when I first gave it, it was sort of a blank field, and now things are evolving. There was a recent, not case, but order, where a US company called Munchie raised money by issuing tokens in an ICO. Of course, you don't say ICO, you say token generation event, because you gotta be, clever. They were raising money in, I'll call it an ICO because it sounds better, in an ICO, And the SEC did something interesting. They didn't sue them. They didn't show up with a black helicopter and masks and take them off to jail like Spetsnaz or FSB. They called them and they said, stop. What you're about to do is going to break the law. I mean, how often did the police call you and go, excuse me, please don't kill your wife? Think how strange that is. But I'll explain sort of the dynamic behind that. But there's an issue that Munchie evokes that sort of resonates through all of this, which is if you are raising money to build a platform, the platform's not ready yet, but if you're raising money to build that platform with tokens, and in theory, those tokens are going to be usable on the platform later once it works, are those tokens before the platform works an investment? Are they an investment? If they're an investment, there's a decent chance that there is security. I'll go into what that word means. And therefore, it's regulated. That's different from, I have a working platform. I'm now going to issue tokens, and those tokens are just usable on the platform, which is there's a decent chance that it's not a security. This is sort of the issue that's rocking through the world right now. And everywhere I go, whether it's Gibraltar or Cyprus or Kyiv or Amsterdam or Silicon Valley, everyone's having the exact same conversation. Okay. I always like to say it's a lot of text, but it's important. I'll give you the friendly version. Right now, if you're trying to raise capital with an ICO, you have limited options about where you can conduct that ICO because China's basically shut down. If you're not counting overseas Chinese, which I admit is a big market, but China is the second biggest economy on the planet. You cannot issue new cryptocurrency or conduct an ICO in China. The largest economy on the planet is the United States, still for now. And if you can't do an ICO into China, and if you avoid the United States because you're afraid, you're limiting the amount of capital you can raise. Okay, there's consequences to not understanding and playing with US law because it is the biggest market. Also, if you're raising money for your venture and you don't raise in the US because you don't want to worry about US securities law, you're kind of missing the bigger picture because the US is where the customers are. US, China, EU, you don't want to ignore your biggest market. And if you do your ICO or your token generation event correctly, you're not just raising money, you're marketing to your potential future customers. Okay, all that media, all that press, all that articles is supposed to get your community excited. Well, if you're nervous about a jurisdiction, they're not going to know about it, these potential customers. And then someone will come after you who's not afraid, sell into the US or some other regulated jurisdiction, get the money and get the customers and come in right after you and nail you. So you can't really ignore it. Like I mentioned, the main agency in the United States that's responsible for US securities law enforcement is the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. That was created by the 34 Exchange Act. And as I also mentioned, people have a fear of the SEC and United States securities law. And there's some reason why they should have fear, because the default rules for raising money in the United States are tough. The default rules, not what you actually have to do, but the default rules, and we'll talk about that. And the SEC can seem mean to people. Though in real life, the SEC is only mean if you're lying, omitting something important that's true, or committing fraud. Okay? They're dedicated to protecting the market and protecting investors, but they're also dedicated towards supporting innovation and helping capital form and businesses form in the US. In fact, it's part of their legal mandate that they must allow investment to happen. And if they come down too hard, they're not doing what they're supposed to do and they can lose funding. So that's a little bit why the SEC called Munchie rather than taking them off to jail. They're being cautious. They don't want to kill something that's potentially good, and token generation events or ICOs or blockchain are potentially good in the capital markets. Okay, so here's a nice little top-level flow chart. So imagine you're a new venture, new enterprise. You have a great idea and you want to get funding. In the old days, you would go to your mom and say, Mom, got some money. Or you go to your friends, or you go to a venture capitalist. But the new way is to issue tokens instead of stock or securities. Issuing kind of means the same thing, whether it's securities or tokens. It means it's an original sale by the issuer to the buyer. If I'm issuing tokens, it's the first sale. It's not the resale, it's not the secondary market. That's issuing tokens. You can argue that mining is not issuing. It may be emission, but it's not issuing because it's not coming from one party to another one. So the next thing you do, whether you're the United States, Kyiv, or Mars, is you think, am I going to sell my tokens into the United States? Now, what does that mean? US securities law applies if you're either selling or offering for sale securities into the United States. So you can be somewhere completely outside the US, but if you sell to US parties or offer to sell, US securities law is going to apply. And if you're connected to the internet and you have a website up and someone in the US can get to it, you're in essence offering to sell. The next part, which is probably, and if you avoid the US, like I mentioned, you are more safe, but it's less money and less customers. It's not really the best result. The next thing you look at is if you're selling your tokens into the United States, are they securities? Securities is sort of a synonym for investment. Securities means stocks, bonds, certain kind of options, certain kind of futures. It's a broadly defined bucket, which basically means a form of investment or investment contract. If you're selling tokens that are securities, and we'll explain what those are, you have to comply with one set of rules. If you're selling tokens that aren't securities, you have to comply with another set of rules. Okay, so suppose they're securities. Or suppose you're trying to figure out if they're securities. So you apply the Howey test, which we'll talk about. And if you fail, as in you don't pass, you fail the Howey test, then you're not a security. If you pass the Howey test, you're a security. If you're selling securities in the United States, the key idea is that you must either register, and that's the word they use, you must either register the offering with the SEC, or you need to find an exemption. 99.9% of the time, if you're selling tokens into the US, you want to find an exemption. You don't want to register. Registering is very expensive. Okay, moving along here. All right, so let's talk about a little bit more of the background. Like I mentioned, there's two key laws that form the basis of US regulations in this area. The one for our purpose that's most important is the Securities Act of 1933. And that act was passed in response to the stock market crash of 29. And that crash happened because everyone was selling stock for companies that had no reported earnings because on a hot tip, borrowing money to do it, and the whole thing fell apart. Sound familiar? So the 33 Act came into place, and it said, its main point was if you're selling securities to the public, you need to disclose all the material facts and not leave out or not admit any of the material facts, and you can't commit fraud. I want you to stress an important point. US securities law is not about good investments. We're not trying to substitute in the government's or someone else's judgment for the buyers. It's just really about making sure that everyone has the right access to information so they can make up their own damn minds. Right? There's no such thing as SEC approved or good investment. Okay, and like I mentioned, if you sell securities in the US, you either need to register it or you need to find an exemption. And let's keep going here. Okay, so securities are your typical things you would expect. Stocks, bonds, all that other stuff. What if you have something that doesn't go by the usual name? Something like a condominium contract or something weird called a token. What's a token? Like when I was growing up, people used tokens in arcades and played video games. Well, if it doesn't fit a normal name, okay, that doesn't make it not a security. Because the 33 and the 34 Act have this concept of an investment contract. The investment contract is sort of this bucket idea, which is if you don't have something called a stock or don't have something called a bond, is it still a security? And the Congress of the US, when they passed this act and said investment contracts are securities, they didn't define what an investment contract was. You can imagine how helpful that was. Basically, as a way of bringing in prior state law on this topic and giving the SEC a way of calling things or taking things that weren't named like securities and treating them like securities. Now, not everything is a security. Okay, some people go crazy. People are really afraid, like everything is a security. No. Pencils aren't securities. Double lattes aren't securities. Apartments aren't securities. Land isn't a security. there's a specific test, and if it fails the test, it's not a security. And you can trust in that. Okay, so the seminal case, the case that matters, the case the whole world is talking about, is the Howey case. That was in 1946. And the Howey case was all about coming up with a test of what is an investment contract and what isn't an investment contract. And there's a 4-part test. Here we go. Okay, I can email this slide to anyone who asks. Put me on LinkedIn, put me on Facebook, I'll send it to you. I'll send you the whole deck. But I'd say this is the slide. Everyone go like this. This is the slide. Okay, this is the Howey test. There's a 4-part test. If you have something like a token, is it a security under the US? Do you need to register or exempt it? There's 4 elements of the test, and for something to be a security, all of these have to be true. If any one of them is not true, then you don't have a security. Okay, so the first prong of the test is there an investment of money? Now, money is broadly defined. It can be your labor, it can be your time, it could be a gift of property. It's not necessarily money. It's more like, is there an investment of value? If I distribute tokens for free, like for example, in an airdrop, no, he said it, that can't be right. He said I could have more. Like an airdrop where you're not paying for it, right? Then there's a good argument it's not security. The next, is it a common enterprise? That means is there a bunch of people working together on something? If I go, sell socks and I earn money through my own efforts, that's not a common enterprise. Or if I'm if there's just a bunch of people or companies working as individuals, that's not a common enterprise. Is there a reasonable expectation of profit? Well, if I put money into some foundation and get tokens, but there's no business behind it, if I'm not gonna make money, it's not a security. Okay, and is the benefit gonna be derived from the entrepreneurial or managerial efforts of others? If I'm the one running the show and I put money into my own business, that's not security. I have to be relying on someone else to generate the results. Okay, now, some things are obviously securities. If I issue a token or anything else that pays dividends, that's a security. If it shares out the profits of the underlying entity, it's no question, right? In that case, you need to register it or find an exemption. That's that. The real question is, how do you treat what are called utility tokens? Tokens that are not being sold because they represent, hey, this is gonna go up 5 times in value, or this can pay a dividend, or you're gonna be part of a fund or whatever. But tokens that have use in some kind of system that you're building where you're not using that token to generate a profit, but because you wanna make use of the system. Like Filecoin, lets you store files everywhere, okay? Or Ethereum lets you run virtual machine code. Right? You're not necessarily buying Ether because you want it to go up in value, and Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation did not sell it on the basis of it going up in value. So what do you do with these utility tokens? So there's a law firm, international law firm called Cooley, and what they said was, you may very well have a token and a platform that is eventually gonna be a utility and not gonna be a security, but if you're raising money now to build a platform where the token is not yet functional because you're using the money from the token sale to build the platform, even if the tokens can end up being a utility, before the platform is built, there's a good chance it will be treated like a security. Okay, I'm gonna say that again because that's the takeaway thing. Even if you think you're issuing utility tokens, what Cooley is saying, and they may be right, is if you sell tokens to the world and raise money to build a platform, before that platform is built, those tokens are just like securities. Now why? Cooley is saying because you can't use them immediately, when people buy millions and millions of these tokens at these huge discounts, they're really buying it not to use it on the platform once it gets built. They're buying it because they want it to go up in value and they want to make a lot of money. So who's bought tokens in ICOs? Who's afraid to admit it? Basically everyone in the room, I'm sure. Or you're doing your own. How many of you actually bought the tokens because you thought it would be useful 2 years from now when they built the platform? Okay, there you go. There's always one. And you know what? You look like the one. There you go. Now we know. It's you. It was you all along. Look, the reality is that most of the time, when people buy these tokens far before they're useful, they're buying them because they want to have them go up in value, waiting for them to get listed on an exchange, and they're going to sell them for 1 million billion times what they paid for, and they're going to retire to Ibiza or Kyiv. And so what Cooley's saying is that's dangerous because these tokens that you're selling before they're usable, those are securities. And if you didn't register it or didn't find an exemption, busted. All right, so here's where SAFTs kick in. Again, SAFT is a simple agreement for future tokens. What Cooley is saying is when you're raising money to build a platform, don't sell tokens to the world. That's dangerous because those tokens are securities. Instead, find a limited number of investors who have lots of money, have lots of good advice, or both. Okay, we call them accredited investors, and sell them the right to receive tokens in the future in exchange for a payment now. So you find your 100 investors, and they are investors. You sign agreements with them, digital or otherwise. You take their money now, you build the platform, and then once the platform is built, you convert those agreements, those SAFTs, into tokens. And because the platform is built, they're utility tokens and not securities. So you're managing the period when they would otherwise be securities with SAFTs, and then once the platform is built and the tokens would not be securities and they would be utility, then you convert them over. Okay? And they're saying this is a way to maneuver around the fact that before a token being useful or functional, it's a security. Like I said, I go all over the world to talk about this. It is shocking and scary how many lawyers miss the idea that these SAFTs are securities. These SAFTs, these agreements are securities. Okay? So you need to treat them like securities. Okay, they are securities. That means you need to either register them or find an exemption. But it's really not that hard because you're not selling these SAFTs to the world. You're selling them to a limited number of investors who are investing a lot, okay, have the money, and you can do background checks on them. You know, KYC, AML, make sure they're accredited. And you find an exemption. You don't need to register. Okay, the first real ICO to do this right, or at least according to the Cooley method, was Filecoin. And who's familiar with Filecoin? Of course, this room would know it inside and out. Filecoin did just this. They raised, I think it was 200 million, 150 million. They raised a lot of money, like a lot. Filecoin did not do an ICO. They did a public raise using SAFTs. Okay, everyone went to the appropriate website. They proved that they were accredited. They did a background check, and they gave these people SAFTs, digital SAFTs. Filecoin is still building out its network. There are no Filecoin tokens in circulation. Okay. Once the network gets complete, then the SAFTs will convert to tokens. Then, only then. And Filecoin is probably safe. Now, you know, is anything truly safe in this area? No, because it's new. And there hasn't been a court case and things have not been decided yet. But the expression I like to use is, you want to be the cleanest dirty shirt on the dirty shirt line. Okay? You want to be the cleanest dirty shirt on the dirty shirt line. In other words, you want someone else to get busted before you do, so that you can get, you know, you can't hold back, you can't wait forever. Or you may have heard another one, like if two people are running away from a bear, you don't need to outrun the bear, you just need to outrun the person behind you. So that's my highly moral lesson for today. And here's a big boo-boo. And boo-boo is a technical legal term. If you're raising money with SAFTs or anything else, don't talk about how you're going to be listed on exchanges real soon. It's going to be real soon. We're going to be on exchange. Because what you're immediately implying to people is that they can take the SAFTs or the tokens they're buying early and sell them later for much more money. That goes to the expectation of profit thing. Okay. Now, there is an argument that when a token is exchangeable, it's more useful, not more valuable, more useful. Because, you know, if you want to use the system, you know, you need to get it somehow. But you don't want to overplay the fact that you're going to be putting it on exchange. You'll put it on exchange when it's for the benefit of the users and the ecosystem, and not before, and you're not going to rush into it. All right, final slide, then all set. So here's, look, life's not perfect, but this is pretty good. Okay, if you want to do it the right way, and you're going to do an ICO, and you're communicating with the public about this proposition, this project you're excited to build, you want to have one website for your project called project.io. Right? And that's just not talking about tokens, it's not talking about your ICO, it's not talking about SAFTs or any of that. You just talk about your project, what you're up to. you should have a completely different website for your ICO or your token generation event. Call it projectico.io. Totally different. And when you go to the main project website, it says, hey, interested in our ICO token generation event? Click here. Takes you to a whole different website. That whole different website should check for the IP of the visitor, see if they're from the US, China, or some controlled jurisdiction. And it should ask, where are you a citizen? Where are you a resident? Click here. Right? If it's a US buyer that went to that website, there's two possibilities. If they're not a US buyer, then I suggest you would have another subdomain called global.projectico.io. And that can handle all the buyers from, say, unregulated jurisdictions. And then you don't necessarily, in their case, have to worry about accredited and AML, KYC. It depends on the law. If it's a US buyer, you don't go, oh no, we can't accept your money. I don't want money. No, wrong. You want their money. Okay, because you want to build the platform and you want them as customers. You just need to comply. So you would route them, say, to usa.projectico.io. There, you would check to see if they're accredited, i.e. they have money, they have good advice, ideally both, and they would validate that for you. And then you sell them the SAFTs. Okay, and again, the SAFTs go to them and they only convert once the platform is usable. Everyone got it? There's gonna be a test. Anyways, thank you. Questions?